Hello and welcome to the 10th episode of This Week in Mappercraft. This past week was March 1st to March 7th, and we'll be covering the years for 2016, 2020, 2021, and 2025. For 2016 and 2020, which were both leap years, we'll also be including events from the 29th of February. As always, all information here can be found on the Mappercraft wiki, which is linked in the description along with the server itself. Let's go over the years. In 2016, the server was running Terraen World under Monsoon Jr. In 2020, the server was running Solus World 2 under Solus. In 2021, the server was running VMJ World under Multi. And in 2025, the server was running Ramayana World under me, MintyMichael. And to start the video, we have several slides here detailing a very eventful week in Terraen World. We have 4 events on the 29th of February. Mappercraft's very first leap year. First off, obviously, Terraen World began. The previous world, Earth World Revived, ended on the 28th of February, and Terraen World began on the 29th. This was a world map which was based off of Earth, but included some additions and changes. It had been used in a regular event on the old Futures of Europe wiki, where Mappercraft came from, called Mappers in the Wild. Basically, from what I can gather, it was a community event where everyone kind of contributed lore and wrote for sort of a shared map. Anyway, here's the quote for that start date. Obviously, with the opening of the world, many nations are founded, the main 2 of note being the Kingdom of Bombwall, which included cities like Cote de Votre and the Bunker Federation. Here's a quote for both of those. Also occurring very early on in the world was a major incident referred to as the FedEx incident, when FedEx, a player, got into a fight with Pezminer and was banned for trying to declare war on the very first day of the world. FedEx claimed to be quitting the server following this, which apparently was a cause for celebration, according to the quote here. Finally, after only a single day, the world transitioned from the starting era to the instability era, which was marked by constant civil wars and split-off nations, with several conflicts containing several wars within the core kind of issue. Here's the quote for that. I'm not sure why they named the first day of the server an error, and a whole era of just the starting day, but they did when they wrote the wiki page. This leads to the second slide with 4 events from the 29th of February to the 4th of March. First, to start off the instability era, we have the beginning of the Bombwaller Civil War, when many of the cities, which had been formed as a part of Bombwell, chose to secede and form their own nations. These include Memestan and Olympia, with Olympia growing very quickly. The leadership of Bombwell, aka Batran, attempted to coerce the players back, but this failed, leading to an official conflict later in the week. Here's the quote for that. And following that event, on the 1st of March, the End was invaded by an international expedition featuring players from Bombwell, Memestan, and the Bunker Federation. The expedition was a success, although according to the quote, the representatives from Bombwell and Memestan fell in battle during the expedition, leading the Bunker Federation to officially claim an End city as their own personal territory. Following the relative peaceful and cooperative nature of the End expedition, the peace was shattered by the War of Bombwellian Subjugation on the 4th, where Olympia and the Bunker Federation allied together to subjugate the remaining Bombwellians. This war is interesting for what might be the first mention of a player, Batran, immediately getting offline upon being declared upon to avoid losing, as seen in the quote here. This action causes Olympia and the Bunker Federation to kind of dispute amongst themselves about the course of the war. Both sides claim to have been betrayed by the other, and although they both continue to fight Bombwell, they kind of act independently instead of as a unit, based on what I've sort of gathered from the wiki articles. This directly leads to the larger Olympi-Bombwell War, which begins the same day, might be basically the same war. It's a continuation of the Bombwell Civil War. The members of Olympia continue the attack on Bombwell that had started with the Subjugation War. However, the members of Olympia fought amongst themselves after Batran logged off. Extra, one of the leaders of Olympia, declared that the nation couldn't effectively wage war and tried to call for a ceasefire, while TL and his supporters attempted to continue the conflict. Eventually, TL declared himself supreme leader of Olympia and officially ended the war in order to deal with the sort of internal conflicts. The Bunker Federation continued to lead some sort of guerrilla raiding war against Bombwell, although it appears they also raided Olympia, leading some players to think that they were on the side of Bombwell, as seen in the quote here. This whole event leads Extra to leave Olympia and start the Papal States of the Ducic Church, one of the made-up religions from a previous world. And then following the Bombwell War, there were several different events for the next 2 days. First, after an impactful speech from Lolistan on the 4th of March, major cultural reforms were instituted among several nations on the server, primarily Olympia and Bombwell, which attempted to abolish both the Donutian and Herinian cultures and heal the divide between sort of pro-building and the pro-PvP/weaponry players. The event was met with optimism at the time, although the long-term effects were more mixed. The players from the different cultures still seemed to fight, although it was more due to personal issues rather than some sort of cultural idea of conflict. The pro-building versus pro-war factions obviously never really went away, mostly due to how Minecraft works as a game, although also due to sort of the rules allowing these multiple styles of play. After the reforms, TL and others plan to form alliances and be more peaceful next world, as seen in the quote, and they seem to be preparing for the return of Panagia revived. The next day, though, on the 5th of March, the Austrasian Civil War began after TL joined Austrasia and brought several of other players along. Orange, the leader of the nation, quickly tried to exert some power over these new players and limit the number of incoming members. But this caused TL to just launch a coup. Orange is overthrown and a player named Cheese is put into power, but their regime kind of quickly devolved into chaos, with several different players, both domestic and foreign, invading the nation. According to the quote, TL declared neutrality and barricaded his house before eventually leaving for Cote de Votre. The civil war continued until the entire country was destroyed. No clear winner was ever determined. The next day, on the 6th, the anti-Duckism crusade was declared by Nano, although it quickly ended in a white peace after he invaded Cote d'Ivoire, as seen in the quote here. And then also that day, on the 6th, the Bunker Federation invaded the nation of Hollywood, exiling the inhabitants, as you can see in the quote here. So a bunch of sort of minor conflicts for these 2 days. And finally, we arrive at the last slide for Terraen World this week. There were 4 more relevant events from the 6th and the 7th of March to go over. First, on the 6th, there was a major explosion in Cote d'Ivoire when Pesminer trapped TL's house with a TNT bomb. TL accidentally activated it while Pesminer attempted to declare war on him kind of personally. According to the quote, Monsoon eventually got online and banned Pesminer for 3 days for griefing. Following that incident, the Francian Homeworld War occurred when the nation of Homeworld accused members of Cote d'Ivoire of raiding them and invaded the city in response. The Grand Armée of France quickly arrived and invaded the Homeworld capital city, ending the war in their favor. According to the quote, the army then returns to Cote and rebuilds quickly, which was just in time for the First Gem War, when General Gems, a former leader of Homeworld, declares a personal war against France. After causing some damage, the French armée launched a massive manhunt throughout the city and discovered General Gem's spawn point, destroying it and winning the war. The general, however, refused to comment on whether the conflict was officially over, as seen in the quote here, although the French themselves declared the war to be over. Finally, the last event for Terraen World this week was the Danji Restoration on the 7th of March, when Dan, also known as Sikorsky, reforms the government of France to curb Chancellor Tomad's lust for power. The Grand Armée was disbanded and the nation was rebranded as the Kingdom of France, with Dan as its monarch. TL was made the new chancellor, according to the quote here, but that ends the very eventful week in 2016. And next up, we have 3 events from February 29th to March 7th, 2020, during Solus World 2. First, on the Leap Day, the 29th, Taiwanese England is formed when the land is purchased by Coolio Tuesday, a high-ranking member of the Taiwanese shogunate. Therefore, the nation becomes a colony of Taiwan, as seen in the quote here. And then the next day, on March 1st, the new rules officially went into effect. This was discussed last week, but this was the official day that the new rules had been previously approved to go into effect on the server. The main change was a large overhaul of the war rules, which banned certain items like elytra and removed rollbacks as an option during peace treaties. These rules were generally well received and didn't really see any major overhauls until late 2024. Here's the quote for that. Finally, the last event for the week occurred on the 7th when the Clown Down PvP tournament began. This was a staff-run tournament that was hosted for several weeks in a row on Solus World 2 and managed to occasionally return in future worlds. It is generally well regarded, although nowadays staff prefers if players kind of run such events, as the Clown Down tournament required a decent amount of staff sort of command block and plug-in work to run smoothly. Here's the quote for that, but it's definitely something that was very impactful on the long-term culture of the server. And next up, we have a bunch of interesting events on March 1st and 2nd of 2021 during VMJ World. Following the start of the South American Malagasy War last week, several different events kicked off on the 1st of March due to it. First, the ISIS-Senegal war occurred when ISIS, an ally of Madagascar, declared war on Senegal, who was an ally of both the Tower Cult and Piranha. Senegal responded by declaring war on Madagascar, briefly drawing them into a conflict in an official capacity before Senegal was quickly invaded and capitulated, as seen in the quote. After invading, ISIS annexed the territory of Senegal, preventing them from assisting their South American allies. In a similar vein, also on the 1st of March, the Prussian-Favrix War occurred, when Favrix, an ally of both Madagascar and Piranha, was considering joining the war on the side of the South Americans. Madagascar recruited the minor nations of Prussia and Pakistan, which is also known as the Italian Caliphate, to invade Favrix to sort of strike first and prevent this. After the Favrix army deserted in the face of the enemy, the cities of Leitzenburg and Milan were bombed, and Prussia offered Favrix peace, successfully preventing them from intervening in the South American Malagasy War. This can be seen by the quote, and the territory of Favrix was split between ISIS and Pakistan after the war, both of them being Malagasy allies. Finally, after these two sort of side conflicts on the 1st of March, 2021, the South American Malagasy War ended in defeat for Piranha and the Tower Cult. A small force did manage to invade Fort Madagascar, but were eventually repulsed. Madagascar responded by landing in Maracaibo, the Tower Cult capital, and launching a sort of coordinated bombing campaign of multiple cult-controlled cities. This led to the Tower Cult being knocked out of the war officially. Madagascar then demanded Piranha cede their offshore gunpowder farm to them in exchange for a peace treaty. This was accepted and the war ended, according to the quote here. This war solidified Madagascar as one of the primary world powers, leading a mixed alliance of sort of minor nations to aggressive actions against more built-up and peaceful nations. After the fall of Rome, there was no major power ready and willing to create sort of a broad coalition to stop this kind of aggression, leading to a temporarily sort of chaotic period on the server. However, I will admit a light shone on the horizon, as on the 2nd of March, the first imperial excursion occurred when Daijang preemptively invaded the nation of Babylon due to their repeated threats against them. This was the first time Daijang had undertaken major foreign action against another nation, and it represented a stepping up of the country into the wider world stage. Babylon was quickly subdued, and after the current government was overthrown, Daijang installed a friendly regime which renamed the nation to Bashiguo, and it became a Jaime of Daijang, as seen in the quote here. This action was seen as a huge success, and celebrations were held both in Bashiguo and Daijang's mainland territories. And then following the first 2 days of the week, there were several other events from the 3rd of March to the 7th. First, on the 6th, the Italian Nevingradi War begins. Following the success of the Prussian-Favrix War, the Italian Caliphate was eager to solidify their place in Madagascar's coalition and wanted to invade another country. Thus, on the 6th, they invaded Nevingrad, which had previously been invaded and forced to pay tribute to Madagascar in a previous week. This can be seen in the quote here. The war did continue until the next day when several additional events occurred, the first being the Shroomish Independence War, when Shroomville declared independence from Italy due to sort of Nevin agitation. Shroomville, despite its declaration, kind of lacked a formal military and also lacked the will to create one on short notice, as seen in the quote here. Therefore, this war had only a minor effect on the main Italian Nevin War. However, before that war would end, the Battle of the Antarctic would occur when Malagasy forces invaded an unclaimed but hidden mod farm in the Antarctic, which was under construction by by Tomad and Scally, who were members of Shank and allies of Dejing. Reinforcements were quickly sent by Dejing Zongguo and the other nations in its sphere, like Ozeon and Mingren, as seen in the quote here. Ultimately, the mob farm was rendered unusable due to its location being revealed, although the actual battle was much more of kind of a stalemate toss-up. Tensions between the two major powers of the server continued to rise due to the event, however, leading Zongguo to begin forming a broader coalition against Madagascar's larger faction. That wouldn't come to fruition until later weeks, though, as right now we have to discuss the end of the Italian Nevengradi War, when Italy managed to defeat Neva despite losing a large portion of its nation to Shroomish agitators. While Nevan forces invaded Italy, the Italian army outflanked them and destroyed Nevengrad proper, leading to its capitulation, as seen in the quote here. The Italians annexed the entirety of Nevengrad and exiled its population before turning towards crushing the Shroomish independence movement next week. And that marks the end of the week for VMJ World. And finally, for the last slide, we have a single event from March 1st to the 7th of 2025 during the final days of Ramayana World. On the 1st, the world was officially declared to be ending, which surprised nobody. Here's the quote from me, kind of detailing it. Technically, the server would close on the 8th, so I will cover that next week, but the world had largely gone inactive at this point, so its ending was kind of long awaited, and essentially just came when the payment period ran out on the end of February. So, yeah, that marks the end of the world from last year. And this marks the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and check out the server at the link in the description. As always, if you have any additional information about any of these events, leave a comment down below or go ahead and add it to the Mappercraft wiki yourself. See you next week from March 8th through to March 14th.